Good afternoon, and welcome to Research Plus Pizza, a lunchtime lecture series that's brought to you by the University of Texas Libraries, and that features research presentations by faculty and researchers and staffers from across the university. And it also features salad and pizza, courtesy of our generous program supporter, Austin's Pizza. There's a feedback form on your chair there. It's a half sheet. It's the half sheet, the little white half sheet that looks like this, and we would very much appreciate it if you would fill that out at the end of the program. And you can leave it in your chair, or you can leave it on one of these little wooden dividers here. We really want your feedback. We want to know how we're doing, and we also want to know if you would like to suggest either a presenter or a topic for future Research Plus Pizza programs. Today's program is made possible by a whole lot of people who are listed here. A lot of folks inside the UT Libraries work to make these programs, and the UT Libraries also brings you good resources and friendly, helpful folks. And in a little bit, I'll talk to you about some more information on finding articles on the topic that's discussed today. But right now, just a little bit of housekeeping. The presentation by Dr. Burdine will take maybe 15 to 20 minutes. There'll be 10 to 15 minutes rather of question and answer after that. Please hold your questions until the end of her presentation. And also, because as you might have noticed, we are recording these presentations so that those who weren't able to make it in person can have access to them later. But because we are recording, when you have a question, if you would raise your hand, I'll come around to you with this microphone so that we can capture your question so that it can be heard. You don't need to say who you are. You don't need to say your name. You can just say your question, okay? All right. So, should you be interested in more information after this, finding information on your own, we have a LibGuide, and you can contact our psychology librarian, Carolyn Cunningham. This is a LibGuide that she's put together with information on finding articles. And so if you chose the database PsycInfo, here's a search that you might do to find some literature. And when you did that search, you can see the sorts of articles that you can find: stress, health risks, and weight status. You know, I think we've all heard of the fabled freshman 15 or something like that. And they talk about various ways to cope and methods of self-care. You could also do a search in the library catalog by just doing a keyword search for something like stress coping in college to find book information as well that you could check out. And some of them you could look at because they're electronic resources. But now I want to introduce you to today's presenter, Dr. Kimberly Burdine, who is a diversity coordinator in the UT Counseling and Mental Health Center. She has a PhD in counseling psychology from Oklahoma State University. Dr. Burdine provides individual, group, and crisis counseling, as well as preventive and specialized programming for Black and African American students. She's interested in preventive treatment and outreach programming in underserved populations, cultural identity development, family of origin, and the interpersonal relationship concerns, trauma survival, training/supervision, and group therapy. Outside of work, Dr. Burdine enjoys quality time with family and friends, which always includes food. Kind of like our thing, you know, we got food, okay? Spirituality and connectedness charge her sense of purpose and passion for mental health work, and she's a firm believer that me time is an absolute must. Please welcome Dr. Kimberly Burdine.
I think if you just go down, click there. Great. Will this work for me?
It should.
Okay.
The thing is in, so it should work.
Where do I point?
See, I think you just point anywhere, but it has to be
Oh.
on here. There. Oops. Now it's on and it went backward, so go forward.
All right, great. Thank you all so much. Thank you for that introduction, and I'm happy to be here. And I am very interactive, so some of you came in a little late, and I was like, please come up to the front so that we can interact. I want to talk with you all today about handling stress and coping with that and self-care, which is really important. And we're going to start with a little bit of reflection and a self-inventory. So I want you to take a moment and think about maybe 2 to 5 things that you're currently stressed about. And if you're like me, it's a very long list, so just shrink it down to the 2 to 5. Okay. And so I want you to just turn to someone that's nearby and just share that a little bit. A big part of self-care and coping is letting people know what's going on, right? And talking about things. So just share. And there might have been things on that list that you made in your mind that you wouldn't feel safe in sharing, and that's totally fine. So think about the things that you would feel safe and comfortable sharing, and just take a moment and talk about those things. Okay. All right. So, anyone care to share with the large group what's on your mind? What are some of the stressors that we're dealing with in the room? Yeah. Yes, the balance of work and school. Absolutely. What else? Deciding a major, right? Figuring out what you want to be when you grow up. Yes. What else?
This is totally a microphone.
Yeah.
We both are stressing about lab reports.
Lab reports, yes, deadlines, and I appreciate that you noted that you're both stressed about that. One of the things that is really important to remember is that you're not alone in the stress, and most people are carrying a lot of the same pressures and that sort of thing, which is a part of what we're going to talk about today. So I thought we'd start out with a quote, and many of you might have heard of this before, but I thought it was a good one by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. If a problem is fixable, then there's no need to worry. If it's not fixable, then there's no use in worrying. Either way, there's no benefit in worrying whatsoever. And now my work is done. We can go home, and that is right. If only it were if only it were as easy as not worrying about something, right? But the truth of the matter, and many of you have probably seen a condensed version of this, like, can you do something about it? Why worry? Can you not? If you can't do something about it, why worry? Okay. But we are going to talk about some things that you can do to cope. I wanted to, when you think about those things that are usually stressors, it's usually connected to our basic needs, right? So you can tell your psychology instructors that you talked about Maslow's hierarchy of need. That came up again today. But usually the things that you are stressed about are connected to our basic needs. So some of you didn't mention it, but some of you might be concerned about finances, right? A very, basic need. Safety, sense of security. Do you have people that you can connect with here on campus? What has it been like transitioning? What is it like if you are working and have to leave home and have things happening with family? So typically when we are most stressed, there's something coming up in our needs that are either not being met, or it's something that we are looking forward to, but it's associated with a need, okay? I wanted to share a little bit of stats. Some of you might have heard, some of you might have heard of the National College Health Assessment. And this assessment goes out. Over 93,000 college students are assessed. And it's a really good resource if you're ever looking for stats and data related to health. And so mental health is a part of that, but also physical health and those sorts of things are included too. But when polled about, and I want us to kind of throw out some numbers here, but stress, anxiety, sleep difficulties, depression are things that come up for students when they ask what kinds of things are impacting your academic functioning. Okay, and so some of you might have noticed when you went through your mental note of the things that you're worried about, it might include some of these things. What do you think is the percentages of that 93,000 that noted that stress impacted their day-to-day, their academic functioning? More than half? Okay, so you think a lot of people? More than that? So about, it's not as large as half, but within the last, and this is spring 2015 data, so within the last 12 months, students reported that anxiety impacted, about 21% of students reported that anxiety was impacting their functioning. So I think it's interesting that we assume that it's much higher, so I don't know it's data, right? So it might not always match. But I'll share some more that probably will make sense here in the end. What about anxiety? What percentage do you think? About the same, okay? So about 20% for that. Sleep difficulties, again, 20%. And depression, about 13%, and then work, also about 13%. And I actually, I looked at the wrong number. Stress was about 30%, so 1 in 3, okay? But the rate, and this is just a question that asked about a student's sense of their overall rate of stress, more than about half, right? So you mentioned half. About half reported that they have more than average or a tremendous amount of stress, okay? So that's where that number maybe will come into play. So stress is natural. It's normal. Oftentimes we're thinking about stress and we're like, I don't want it. I want to take it away. I'm so stressed out, and everybody's trying to be not stressed. Why might I say that stress is a good thing? Anybody have a sense of that? Yeah. Yeah, it keeps us on our toes, right? It's a source of motivation. You wouldn't want to live a life with no stress. And we'll talk more about that, right? But stress is usually an indication that you care, right? But what we want to manage is that the stress doesn't get too overwhelming, because then it could be harmful and we can, lose our sense of functioning. So what we're going to talk about today is some signs of stress, a little bit more about why we have stress, and then how to cope with stress, which is probably what you're all here for. It's like, okay, how do I cope with this? All right, so how do you know when you're stressed out? And that's a real question I'm asking. Can't sleep? Irritability? Procrastination? I personally know when I'm maxed out on stress when I'm doing absolutely nothing. Right? So when I'm like watching Netflix and I got a task list of 50 things, then that's an indication to me that I'm probably a little overwhelmed because I'm not actually functioning. But if you notice, how we know we're stressed falls into these 4 categories, right? So there was the physical symptoms, so not being able to sleep, or some of the, like stomach issues and those sorts of things would be physical symptoms. Emotional, so the irritability, right? You're snapping at people, or just feel maybe even sad. Some behavioral changes. Maybe you isolate yourself, or maybe you notice that you become really work-oriented or really friend-oriented. And then the thoughts are big, okay? So it's sometimes, for people, like when they're stressed out, they'll think like, I suck at life. This is so hard, I can't do it. Those are the ways that in our thoughts that these come up. So when we think about the signs of stress, that's usually different for different people, but they usually fall in these categories. And when we talk here in a little bit about how to cope with stress, we want to come back to these 4 areas to figure out what we can do to cope with it, right? We need to think about things that we can do that'll help us cognitively. We need to think about things that'll help us emotionally. All right, why do we have stress? Most of us have heard of fight or flight, right? Maybe not. You will eventually in your coursework. But stress is necessary. It's a good thing. And remember I said you wouldn't want to live life without stress. I don't want this to be true for anyone, but we need to be able to respond in a physiological sense if there is danger. Okay? If a lion came into this room right now, we need to be able to respond to that, right? Because we're probably in danger, and we need to be able to do that without having a whole lot of thought, right? There's just going to be some things that happen to us physiologically. There's going to be some things that shift in our thoughts, and we're going to be able to respond to that. So we need stress. It's a good thing. But most of the time, those life-threatening issues aren't happening. But our body doesn't know that. And so if you are in the middle of an exam, let's say, for example, or a presentation in your class, that fight or flight response might be kicked in, and we have to train our bodies to just bring that back down and train our bodies and remind ourselves that we are not in that life or death situation. But we need that. And again, we'll talk a little bit more here in just a second. But it can cause problems if we're not really in danger. All right, so any of you in a stats class right now? You can tell your stats instructor that you like talked about standard deviation and a bell curve in the context of something related to stress. But Yerkes-Dotson law is a law about performance. And it basically posits that there's an optimal amount of stress that we need in order to perform well. Okay, so if you don't have stress, you're on this, maybe inactive or bored, or maybe the burnout and the breakdown, like when I said I'm just doing nothing because I'm just kind of overloaded. We don't really want to be on either end of those, okay? Unless you're on vacation, it's totally fine to not be stressed about anything, right? Because you don't have any worries. But if you have an exam or a midterm or something that you need to be prepared for, you can't live in that side, right? Because you have to be able to perform. So optimally, we're in this kind of peak performance where we have what you all talked about, that motivation. We have a healthy tension, right? And that's going to motivate us to prepare for an exam. That's going to motivate us to train if we're an athlete. And those things are really important. Where we get into trouble is if we cross that peak performance line and then we're too overwhelmed. So some of you might have noticed that this happened to you before where maybe you have like an exam and you've studied, but then you get in the exam and then there's too much pressure and you can't actually perform. And that would be problematic. But you want to have a little bit of pressure in order to perform well. So there is a sweet spot of performance and of stress. So one thing I want you to walk away from with this presentation is that stress is a good thing. We need it. We don't want to not be with stress, but we want to bring it into context. All right. So how do we stay in that? And we'll get into some of why a lot of you came out today. How do you cope with stress? And maybe we'll do that in a paired activity again. So think about what you already do. You also have a handout that has some different things that you can do. So look through that if nothing comes to mind in terms of how you cope. But I want you to think about one or two things that you do right now that helps you cope with stress. And the reason that I'm asking you is that oftentimes coping with stress management, self-care, is something that we already know intuitively and that we're already it's just a matter of doing it and putting those things in place. So why don't you turn to that neighbor again and just talk about some things that you're already doing or maybe some things on that list that feel like they might be something that you might want to try.
There's a thing that I saw that looks a lot like flashcards, but we do it in a pretty busy way to try to make sure the things in the circulation also back. And I've been trying it and it hasn't worked yet. But yeah, you have to also watch for that.
All right. And I appreciate everybody participating in this way and connecting with one another. Anyone want to share? Maybe something that you do that's not on that list? Anybody have one of those that they would like to share? Zumba, yes. So that's getting in your body. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, they want to be able to hear.
Yeah, we can't hear you on the audio, video if we don't have you on mic.
Okay. Well, Zumba, but yes, getting into your body. So that's that behavioral. That probably also is emotional too, and physiological. What else? Anybody else? What's maybe something that you saw on that list that you might want to give a try, or you've thought about it and you haven't done it yet, but you feel like it's a really good one that might work for you?
Speak to the box.
Okay. Well, this is what I recommend for others, and I don't always remember myself, but it's important to take meal breaks. When I see some of the students walking, eating out of those trays, no, stop and take a break to eat.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I'm going to point out here in a second, but mindfulness is really what that's about, right? So taking time to do things mindfully, paying attention to the actual taste. How does something actually feel in your fingers before you put it into your mouth? Those sorts of things are really going to help to bring you back into the moment. One for me that is huge, this is just kind of my self-care, is gummy bears. And you all are laughing. I'm so serious. I'm in love with gummy bears. They are my love language. It is just like, it is my thing. But the thing that you want to be mindful of about what you choose to do for self-care is that it should be something that doesn't have the potential to cause more stress. Okay? So I love those gummy bears. But I probably don't want to overindulge in that too much because it wouldn't be healthy, and there's not a whole lot of nutritional value in that. So as you think about things that folks do to engage in self-care and cope, oftentimes we're maybe doing unhealthy things, or we're doing things that maybe aren't necessarily unhealthy, but we're doing it in excess. And usually why that happens is, and this is probably true, or maybe not for you all, maybe you all aren't like this, but let's say you have 2 exams, 3 quizzes, and a project due this week. Okay, and you got to get it all done, and you care about it, and you're focused, right? So probably what you do is every waking moment you are dedicating to getting stuff done and being prepared, right? And so that what happens at the end of that 5-day stretch? What usually happens? You're exhausted. You're exhausted. You crash out, right? And then what happens? You end up taking the whole weekend and you're binging on Netflix, and you're just, and then you're probably, because you resent it, right? And you're like, now I'm going to take all of this time. Well, some of the things that are really important to be mindful of is that we want to get into a daily practice of self-care. And if you could just take 30 minutes a day, 30 minutes to an hour, and oftentimes we're like, we don't have time. Like, I don't have time to do something to, kind of take care of myself. But if you do that, the 30 to 60 minutes an hour, it's 3.5 hours or 7 hours max that you have contributed that week, as opposed to then on the weekend crashing and burning, and then you've used up 2 full days, and then you're not getting anything done. So in the short run, it really is helpful to get in the daily practice. Mindfulness is really key. Usually when we are anxious, we're outside of the current moment, right? We're usually thinking about things that are going to happen in the future, or we're thinking about things that happened in the past. And it's not that we don't want to think about those things, right? We definitely need to think about our future. We definitely need to be reflective on things that have happened in the past. But when you are tiptoeing on outside of that optimal level of performance, we want to shift our focus to what we can do right now. What can I do in the next hour that's going to be helpful? I probably don't need to be thinking about getting into med school and passing the MCAT when I'm tiptoeing off of that optimal level of performance, okay? So I just want to bring my focus back into the now. What can I do in the next hour that'll be helpful? And then a part of that, too, is values-based prioritizing. Oftentimes when we are stressed, there is a potential that we're not really doing things that line up with our values. And when you're managing stress, your values might change from moment to moment or day to day. Maybe today the value is, I have to study for this exam, so academics is going to come first. Maybe tomorrow it could be family obligations. And so those values are going to change from day to day, but it's really important to balance that and prioritize accordingly. And as you're thinking about that daily engagement in self-care, go back to those 4 kind of areas, right? So what are some things that you can do that will be that will help you to engage your body? So the Zumba that you mentioned before would be great for that. What are some things that you can do to tend to your emotional health? You know, is it hanging out with your best friends? Is it connecting with family and friends? Those sorts of things. And then cognitive is really important too. Shifting your focus back into that healthy thinking. And some of what is there listed on the handout, thinking about bringing things in perspective. That's a cognitive focus. Perspective, what's important? What do I need to get done? What do I need to get done today? All right, so we've kind of come to the end, and I wanted to give an opportunity for, in addition to the Q&A, I have what I call just 5 and 5. I want to see what you all have taken away, and there's opportunity for chocolate, too, for those of you that want to maybe respond. What's one thing that you recall about the stats on stress in academics?
Please raise your hand.
30% feel stress,
Yeah.
and 20% feel anxiety,
Yes, absolutely. Great.
and 13% work.
Your memory, yes. That is exceptional. Help yourself, and then we'll pass it around. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, he covered what I was going to mention.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
What's one of the 4 ways that stress shows up?
Physically, emotionally, behaviorally, and I'm forgetting one of them. Mentally?
Cognitively, yeah, in our
Cognitively,
thoughts,
yeah.
yes, absolutely. Help yourself to some chocolate. What is healthy stress?
Stress that gives you optimal performance and
Yes.
the balance.
Yes, absolutely. And what is important about the Yerkes-Dotson law?
It shows you a perfect line of where some stress is okay or what stress is like too much. So it's like the optimal point.
Right. There's an optimal level of stress that is helpful for performance. And then lastly, can anyone name a key concept related to stress management?
Taking time for yourself and taking care of yourself.
Yes, so engaging in daily practice of self-care. Great. Well, that's all that I have, and I think we'll take questions now.
The Yerkes-Dodson law said there was a peak performance on it. So before the peak performance, there is the good part, and after there is the bad part. So on exactly that point, is it good or bad? Is it like on that exact peak? Do you find yourself overwhelmed, or you can just keep going on?
Right. So I'm glad that you bring that up, because oftentimes we're in this zone that sometimes teeter-totter. So let's say you're Simone Biles, okay? And you are about to, have your performance in the Olympics. You probably are experiencing some stress in that moment that might tiptoe over a little bit, right? But you can talk yourself, right? You remind yourself, you do some of those strategies, right? So cognitively, I got this, I've been preparing, this is, I'm just gonna focus on the moment, right? And oftentimes you'll hear like professional athletes, like when they have a big game, right? It's the championship. And people are like, it's all about the championship. And those people will tell you what? I'm just worried about fundamentals. I'm just going to make sure that I'm performing. They're being mindful and they're in the present moment. So it might go back and forth. So I really think being in that, there's a range, right? So not necessarily right at that point, but that is, usually really good because you're gonna perform well. But it might tiptoe either way. There was a question up here.
We hear a lot about the stress added to modern life by electronic devices. So what do you recommend to folks to students about the use of electronic devices?
Yeah. That's a good question, and probably some of you might have some thoughts about that. But I think that it's really important, and I have to do this for myself. So I'm a diversity coordinator, so I'm really invested in thinking about marginalized communities, thinking about oppression and privilege, right? So a big part of what I do and how I get information is social media. Well, we know that social media is sometimes stressful related to when we're thinking about, race relations and all of the things that are going on. So every once in a while, I have to unplug. And that's something that I encourage folks to do because it's a lot. It can be a lot to balance when you're trying to focus and the value on that day is I got to focus on that, or sometimes the value in my day and the priority is self-care, so I'm going to unplug. But while they can help to optimize performance in terms of technology and having access to information, right? I think it's wonderful, but we do need to be mindful of it and make sure that we're balancing that. Do other people have thoughts about that? Or do you have something you want to share? Anybody? Okay. What other questions do you all have? Are you thinking about a question? Okay. Okay.
If people have questions later, how could they get in touch with you?
Yes, so I have a little information slide. You can certainly, I didn't put my email here, but it's kburdine@austin.utexas.edu, but you can search me in the directory. But if you want to learn more, and I think that the resources that you already shared in terms of kind of accessing the library resources are great, but there's a lot, speaking of technology and resources, there's a lot of resources online about stress management, and it's a lot of good information, okay? Because some of you might not, coming to the counseling center might not be a good fit, and talking to other people might not be a good fit, but there's a lot of resources online. You can certainly go to the CMHC website, but then there's also calm.com or different resources like that focus on meditation, relaxation, again, things that are going to bring you back into that present moment that are really helpful. So online resources are wonderful. At the CMHC, we also have a mind-body lab. And that, again, is it's a room that is featured that has really relaxing, cozy chairs. It's free. You can come access it anytime, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. You can also check out equipment that has mindfulness activities and relaxation activities. So it's really a cozy place to come and just kind of be mindful. And then you can always visit the Counseling and Mental Health Center if you have more questions, and we can help you figure out kind of what might be best next steps. And we're on the 5th floor of the SSB, or you can call us. You can talk to a counselor over the phone as well. And that's a resource there.
So I have another question.
Great.
So what advice do you give on when somebody should take a next step when it's not possible to with one's own resources deal with stress, when professional help should be sought?
Yeah. Some of the things that we look for in terms of trying to identify whether or not, and by we I mean mental health professionals, in terms of what might start to feel like outside of that normal realm of stress would be interruption of your functioning, right? So if, and this would be for a sustained period, right? So any given day, any one of us can be like tapped out, or we can not be functioning well optimally. But if it's been 2-3 weeks, and certainly if it's been your whole life experience that you've had trouble and you're not able to function in the way that you want to do. And when I'm talking about functioning, I'm talking about outside of academics, outside of work. If your friends are expressing that they are concerned about your level of stress, then that's a sure sign that it might be kind of veering into that realm that might be room for you to get support. So any interruption in your functioning that feels like it's outside, and certainly after you've tried things like you've tried meditation, you've tried relaxation, you're extremely organized and you have everything prioritized, and you still are having overwhelming stress and anxiety, and certainly when we get over into that non-optimal level like panic attacks and those sorts of things, then that certainly would be a time to seek help.
Any other questions?
I don't know how to read what that means. Hopefully it means that this was
You're not stressed yet.
great information, or you're not stressed. I think that, and maybe you're going to kind of talk here at the end, but there's an evaluation. Are you going to talk about that?
Yeah,
Okay.
so there's an evaluation form. It's the half sheet that is in your chair. Please feel free to take away the colored paper with the tips for self-care. That's for you. There's some extra copies. Maybe if you have a friend who wasn't able to attend today, you would want to share that with a friend or colleague. But do fill out the half sheet to evaluate this program and give us your suggestions for future programming. And you can leave that in your chair, or you can put it on one of these wooden dividers here, and we'll pick it up after. And we want to thank you all so much for coming out, and we especially want to thank Dr. Kimberly Burdine for sharing these tips with us.